Hey, I'm Stan Gibson, and this is the Inspiration Podcast. Let's get to it. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Inspiration Podcast with Stan. I'm your host, and I'll tell you what, I'm stoked. For those of you that aren't familiar with the Inspiration Podcast with Stan, there's a lot of leadership podcasts out there that they showcase the highlight reels, the awards, the standing ovations, all that good stuff, and rightfully so. Here we dive into the messy middle where real growth happens, and nobody really wants to talk about it. We're going to talk a little bit about some of those episodes today that we had season 1 where they got pretty real. That's the thing I love about this. We sit down with leaders who aren't afraid to pull back the curtain on their journey. We explore self-doubt. We explore the resilience they built, how they had the courage to authentically push themselves forward and move out of conformity. So, hey, grab your favorite drink, get comfortable. Let's jump in. Let's get this conversation started. Yeah, season 2. Oh, my goodness. If you're ever thinking about doing a podcast, let me just give you a few statistics that ought to really motivate you to do one, not demotivate you. But, only 50 to 60% of all podcasts make it through the first 5 episodes. Only half, maybe even a little bit less than that, really make it through the first 5 episodes. And 70 to 80% only make it, well, really don't even make it past 10 episodes, 70, 80%. So you're left with 20%. And then another kind of cool statistics that I saw was that only 10% of the current podcasts that are out there, you go to Apple, you go to Spotify, only 10% have even had a recording within the last 90 days. So there's no cadence to those that even did stick around. We're trying to do the Inspiration Podcast about one for every 2 weeks. And I really want to move that to once a week, I think, for season 3. Right now, I think we're kind of making sure that we're finding our swim lane and, finding out, what the right cadence is and all that good stuff. But there's millions of YouTubes out there, but there's only just a few podcasts really that make it out there. And so anyway, it's interesting. And the nice thing about this podcast, the Inspiration Podcast, I got to tell you, we made it to the top of the Apple charts week 1. Week 1, we made it to the top of the Apple charts. I can't thank you enough. For all of you that reached out, you hit the little plus sign, the follow sign. It was amazing. And, the more people started listening and seeing the guests that we had on, which I want to talk a little bit about some of the guests today that we had on. But I also, in today's episode, again, this is, season 2, the very first episode. So it'll be my 11th podcast. I want to talk about something that's really touchy and something that it's uncomfortable, quite honestly, at times. And that's talking about faith. It's talking about God. It's talking about religion. And you'll notice in some of my podcasts, we do go there. And we don't do it we're not ashamed of it. We don't shy away from it. Because again, we talk about a lot of situations where people are quite honestly, they're at the low part of their life. They've had some traumatic things that have happened to them, either personally, professionally. This isn't a podcast about trying to convert people. It isn't a podcast about, wanting people to think the way Stan Gibson thinks. It's a podcast about leaning in to how do you get past those times in life where you're just at the bottom. You're just at the bottom. And so we want to talk a little bit about that today. So that's just one of the things. I want to talk about who we are, but also who we're not. And again, if you listen to any of the first 10, you try to know that I do about, half of, let's just say 5 to 6 podcasts where it's a solo cast, just like this one right here. It's just me, just speaking truth, just telling you what's on my mind, but giving you my honest feelings. And then I've got the other half that have some really amazing guests. I mean, really amazing guests. And that's going to continue in season 2. And I want to talk to you a little bit about what you can look forward to the rest. But I do want to talk a little bit about faith, though today is you're going to see it discussed in more episodes than not. And again, it isn't anything that we're trying to aim for. It's just something that's going to come up. And again, not trying to convert. I'm just trying to get people to listen, to understand more, to be interested in saying, how did people pull themselves up? So it's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be a lot of fun. When it came to faith and I look at season 1, there were probably a few solo casts I had where I mentioned it. And, I don't come out and, I don't beat people over the head with it. It is, some people called it sneaky Jesus, but for me, it's nothing that I go out and, try to get on a platform and tell everybody to, not only what I believe, but here's what you should believe. I just spoke, as a keynote speaker out in Los Angeles about a month ago. And it was interesting because, I don't really talk about it on stage. I have a really good platform in which I talk about, but I do mention talking about morning routines. And part of my morning routine, I talk about, getting up, I make the bed. First thing I do is it's an accomplishment. It's a win. I talk about getting my lemon juice and I talk about doing my faith-based reading. I talk about doing my exercises, my stretching, and I just talk about that. And it's funny, after I'm done, I'm typically signing books and I have more people than not that show up and say, "Hey, that comment, those couple comments you made about your faith? Thanks for doing that. We don't do that often enough, and it's just such a taboo thing, and I just wanna say thanks." And I don't think there's ever been a speech that I've given where, again, I just said it nonchalantly, that I haven't had 2 or 3 people come up afterwards and just say, "Thanks for speaking your mind. Thanks for being honest. Thanks for being authentic. You didn't beat us over the head with it. You just came up and you just mentioned it." I was in the corporate world for 4 decades, and I really don't remember a boss I ever had that had the same beliefs that I did, and that's not good nor bad. I just know that it was taboo and, I suppressed, any of my thoughts, because I just know that in the corporate world, politics, religion, there's certain things that, get a little dicey. Now I'm fortunate to be in a situation where, several of the people on my support team believe, and I'm a Christian, by the way. I believe in Jesus Christ, and they do too. And that's great because we can start off some meetings with an actual prayer, and which is so different from my 4 decades in the corporate world. And again, not saying good or bad. I'm just saying that, now I can be more comfortable. And that's a thing about this podcast. We can talk about, faith, and we can talk about certain things that I just felt like were maybe a little bit off, probably, off limits, maybe in the corporate world. So, when you look at my first season, we had some guests. And again, I mentioned probably my faith just in a few places here and there in my solo cast, but we had some guests. For example, we had Fred Wakefield, who was he was in the NFL for 8 years and, undrafted free agent. And just a great story about what it's like to live in uncertainty every year. Somebody's coming to take your job. And, he talked a little bit about his faith and about, how it's matured over the years. Talked a little bit with John Combs. John Combs, one of the, he voted top real estate manager in the United States. By I think his real estate forum. We didn't really talk about faith, but, John was open about, his marriage to, his partner, Sheldon, very open about it. So, but I do know John. I do know John's faith as well. And so, it's just something, again, it's real life. It's just real things that we talk about. And it's an awesome conversation. Had a conversation with a friend of mine and just an amazing story, I got so many DMs and comments after it, but Amanda Zwanziger. And I knew Amanda back 20 years ago, and she'll admit this. She even says it on the podcast, a little bit of a wild child, but she was an international salesperson, just a phenom, and was emotionally paralyzed just from everything going on in her life. She was a success on the outside. She was just miserable on the inside. And then her fiance, several years later, was in an ATV accident, and he was paralyzed from the neck down. And so they talk. That whole episode is a lot about faith. It's a lot about their faith and the fact that he actually walked out of the hospital within 30 days. It wasn't a run, it wasn't a sprint, but while she was a believer, he was kind of. It's not that he wasn't, but I tell you what, when you have traumatic things like that happen in your life, you definitely go ahead and you find a way to find out what your purpose is and what you believe in. And again, God doesn't always guarantee you good results, when you pray, but on the other hand, it certainly is it's a great place to go to when your faith is shaken and your world is shaken. Uh, Another podcast talked with Carly Patterson, 2004 U.S. Olympic gymnast, gold medal winner, and it's a really just a heartfelt conversation. And talk about somebody who has been on the biggest platform in the world. It really came down to her to win the floor exercise for the U.S. to win a gold medal, and she had to nail it, and she did. But her faith matured so much more after the Olympics, and even as trying to have children, some of the setbacks, and we had a few moments I think on the episode where we both had to take a little break and kind of let the moment carry itself. And but again, that's part of real life, everybody. That's part of real life. I had a great conversation too with Don Wolfgram, who's broke the glass ceiling when it came to wealth management, and she busted right through it, and she did it with grit until grit wasn't enough, and she realized that she was broken and had to basically take a reset in life. And we didn't really get into that much on the faith base, but it's an awesome episode. So I think the thing that I'm saying is we had some really, oh my gosh, just some really great episodes. And it isn't that we shy away from faith, but we also, we don't go out there and it's not a conversion hour. It's something that, I want people to bring up. I want you to know something. Of all the clients I have, some are agnostic, some are Hindu, some are, astrologists, some are it's all over the board. And that's fine. That's good. I love that. I love learning about other people's faith, and I don't push anything. And for those clients that I do have that, have the same beliefs that I do in Christ, we have some pretty deep conversations. They want some of that coaching, and and I can go there because I've studied enough. I don't consider myself a true theologian, but I do consider myself probably more well-rounded than most people when it comes to, understanding a lot of the passages and, kind of, again, I'm not big on religion because religion is a bad word to me. I believe, that comes with a lot of rituals. That's just me. Whatever you believe is fine. But I don't believe in a lot of rituals. I believe in a faith-based path to a higher power, which is God and Jesus Christ. So those are just some of the things that we talk about. I personally believe that just have a take on whatever you believe in. Just have a take. Research it, study it. I think that most people are in the religion they're in because they grew up with parents that had that religion and they just never challenged themselves. And I think that it's like, diamonds, they're the best diamonds, they're pressure tested. You've got to pressure test yourself to have a very strong belief. I don't think just, following in somebody else's footsteps is probably going to do it. I can tell you from my standpoint, it's kind of how I became a Christian. My parents, they went to, it's called Church of Christ in a small Midwest farming community. And I got baptized for all the wrong reasons. I mean, I'm really big into self-awareness with my clients. We study a lot about self-awareness. We probably go through the first 2 to 3 months knowing more and more about self-awareness because I believe that's just the foundation for leadership. And now that I know a lot more about myself, I can sit back and assess my 12-year-old, 11-year-old, I don't know how old I was, but I can assess myself at an early age getting baptized because it was a chance to be on stage. I'm a speaker. I loved the attention. I got up there, people were, kind of cheering for me and, the dopamine's flying out, it's going off. I've got a happy meter and anyway, it's a cool thing. That's for all the wrong reasons. Of course, I'm young, so I give myself some grace. I didn't know better. But I will also say I kept going to church because, of course, when you go to church on Sunday, good things are going to happen to you during the week, right? I mean, I played basketball, football, baseball, and I figured that if I went to church on Sunday, then obviously I was going to have a really good game that week. And again, all the wrong reasons. And that isn't how faith and religion works. But that was my early journey until I got older. And then I started saying, I got to pressure test this stuff. I got to start to read more. And I started getting books, and I wanted to know more about, you know, Muslims, which I think, again, I think there are very, very strong principles to, the Muslim religion. I think there are strong principles. Yeah, I know more about Taoism. I know more about Judaism. I know more about Hinduism. I know more about Buddhism. I know more about these different religions, and I did my own research in order to really come to the place where I can say, is what I believe, is there substance behind it? Why do I believe? Why? I always tell people, your why has to be bigger than your what. I knew what I believed. I had to know my why. And when I really researched it hard enough and I read enough books and I felt like, I had given everything a fair shot, I felt like I had made the right choice. And I do have very specific reasons. If you ever want to know them, DM me, call me, we'll talk about them. But, you know, I really believe that, there are just some things that scientists can't explain. While I'll never have 100%, in fact, I probably figure I only have about 30 or 40%. I mean, if you had 100%, you wouldn't have faith in anything. But I believe that there are things that, God will, give me the punchline someday. Hopefully not right away, but someday when I get to heaven, he's going to give me the punchline as to why all these crazy things happened. But I really believe you have to do that research. I believe you have to know your why and not just your what. I look back at my life, everybody, and I just, I think, it's one of the things I just like, gosh, there had to be a higher power. I mean, you just had to be because, when I was 10 months old, kind of a little bit of a crazy story, but when I was 10 months old, I was pretty much left in the room to die. My parents were told that I wasn't going to make it through the night. The doctors couldn't find out what was wrong. They were, told to, say their goodbyes. And again, I was 10 months old. My dad, we were on a Air Force base, Chanute Air Force Base in Rantoul, Illinois. And my dad was a maintenance technician. He took care of the airplanes. He made sure that they were safe before they were able to fly. And the general would not fly unless my dad had inspected the plane. So my dad had a great relationship with the general. And so out of desperation, my dad called the general at night and told him the story. And the general did something he should never do, is he went outside of the Air Force Base and called a doctor in Champaign, Illinois, and said, we've got a situation here. And typically, if you live on the base, you can only be treated by doctors from the base. But he went outside of protocol. And so he called this doctor, Dr. Gillespie. And Dr. Gillespie came and, through the night, he observed me and did whatever. And, give yourself some grace to laugh at the next thing I'm going to say. But obviously I made it. I lived. But he prescribed goat's milk and lactic acid. Goat's milk and lactic acid. That's what saved my life. And of course, I believe that God saved my life. I believe that there was a bigger purpose for me to live. And the one thing I always do, I work with my clients on having identity, having and knowing their personal identity, not who you want to be, who you think you want to be. I'm talking about knowing your transformational identity. Starts out typically with a lot of I am, or I embrace, or I'm the kind of person who, but it really is a strong, strong list of statements that I can get into the whole neurological aspect of how it works. But basically, it's lifting things out of your subconscious and putting things into the conscious part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, the frontal lobes, that basically start to indoctrinate, the true being that you were meant to be. And so one of mine, and I say these in the morning, I say them in the evening, because again, I want them to permeate into my brain. But one of them is, I was spared at 10 months old from the Holy Spirit with the expectation that I would go on to make a difference and help others and lead them through transformation. I was spared at 10 months old by the Holy Spirit. It's one of my identity statements. It's one of the reasons I believe that in this season of life, I have a duty to make sure that I can work with as many people as possible. Again, not trying to bring them to my specific way of thinking, but I want to expose them to as much as possible because you will be tested in life. Again, I'll throw out, a little bit of biblical stuff here, but in the book of James, it doesn't say if you're ever going to be tested. It says when. It doesn't say if, it says when. You will all be tested in life. I'm going through some right now personally, and it has only made me lean in harder, lean in a lot harder, which is kind of hard sometimes for me to do because sometimes I like to avoid pain. But, to me, it's only made me lean in harder. So I believe it's a journey. I believe it's something that you should explore. One of the takeaways is if you haven't read Viktor Frankl's book on meaning, got a man's search for meaning. Again, Viktor Frankl. The book is probably, I don't know, might be 80, 90 years old, but I will tell you, it is just as relevant today as it was 80 to 90 years ago. But if you don't know who Viktor Frankl is, he was a Holocaust survivor, lost his family, lost everything. And he was a psychologist. But while he was in the concentration camp, he noticed those that made it and those that didn't. And again, they had purpose. Those that made it. In fact, I'm just going to read a couple of quotes from Viktor Frankl. He said, "Everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose," and that's the key word, to choose one's own way. We have to choose the direction in life we want to take. The second one he said is when we are no longer able to change in a situation, when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. Again, I go back to knowing your why, not your what, but knowing your why, having purpose. And the final quote that I'll read from him is, "Those who have a why to live can bear with almost any how." Those who have a why to live can bear almost anyhow. I think those are strong. I mean, you almost got to let those you got to let those kind of sink in for a little bit. But it's a great book, Viktor Frankl. He wrote a lot about drifting, And I talk to a lot of my clients. I have a mastermind, and I have I also do leadership training called the Resilience Lab. And I talk about drifting. Satan loves it when we drift. He just absolutely loves it when we just kind of blend in and become mediocre. When we don't have a take on life, when we don't have a take on purpose, when we don't have a take on religion, when we don't have a take, again, our purpose for living, that's just music to Satan's ears, just music, because we drift. And there's nothing worse in life than drifting. At some point, you've got to take a position. You've got to choose, as Viktor Frankl said, you've got to choose what you're going to stand for. And that's why I'm having this difficult conversation here about faith today. Again, I'm not shying away from my faith. I believe in what I do. I've studied it. I've done the research. Could be wrong, but you know what? I've done enough research to where I'm willing to take those that risk. And it's one of those things. It's really going to lead to, I think, a pretty stout second season. Because I've got some phenomenal guests lined up, and I just want to give you a little bit of a teaser here, a teaser on some of the people, because it's really pretty cool. And some of them will talk about faith, some of them we won't. It just depends on how the conversation goes, but we will always talk about sometimes the worst parts of their life, not in a way that, is demeaning, just when they were down and out, how did they pull themselves up? Because I really believe imposter syndrome. I think they say that over 60% of all CEOs have imposter syndrome. I've written about that 2 or 3 times. I think it's 60%. Over 60% have imposter syndrome. And, everybody's got something. And so you gotta know, you gotta transform the mind. You've gotta go back to what I talked about, transformational identity. You've got to make sure that you know your purpose, you know who you are at the core. But some of the guests that I've got, they're pretty interesting. One, uh, Cam F. Awesome. Cam F. Awesome. I just watched a, uh, Netflix documentary on Cam the other night, and, he is it's called Counterpunch, by the way, and Cam is noted as being one of the best heavyweight fighters ever to never go pro, and he got, knocked off of the, 2012 Olympic team, and it's just a great story, but when I talked to him, I just said, "Man, this guy's got growth mindset written all over him." And when I say growth mindset, there's some work that was done by Carol Dweck from Columbia University on growth mindset, growth versus a fixed mindset. And so I work with a lot of clients on growth mindsets as well. Lot of clients. And we always go to growth mindset. And when I talk to Cam, and again, his real name is Limroy Thompson. And he not only changed his mindset after his stumbles in life, he changed his name to Cam F. Awesome. But you're going to love that episode. You're going to love it. I've got another one coming up. Again, probably no faith-based discussion, but David Williams, and he's a golf he's a golf pro. And the thing that makes him unique to me is, number one, not just the fact that he just had a one of his students was in the Masters, but it's that we won't even be talking about how to hold a club, a backswing, a foot. We won't be talking about any of the techniques of golf. We're going to talk about something that he and I just are in so much alignment with. I've worked with David now for about 3 years, and I can have a 2-hour session with David and maybe swing the club maybe twice, because we talk about the mind and we talk about, conditioning the mindset and allowing the club to basically perform and execute the act. And that's how I work with a lot of my clients. We talk about the mindset. And once we get that right, we can execute effortlessly. And you're going to love this. In fact, I'm going to try to make sure that we get this episode out probably by, the 1st of July. I know a lot of people will be golfing, but I think that once you listen to this episode, you're really going to enjoy it. And you're just going to, again, it's going to be pretty deep. So that'll be interesting. Another one is with Brent Long. And Brent Long played a little bit for Ohio State until he broke his back, broke almost everything in his body. And he put himself through college as a male dancer. I found that really funny because today he has one of the top sales consulting positions in the country, and it's all based on biblical principles. So that one will be very much biblically based. And, not all his clients are in alignment with him on faith, but he does teach, sales techniques through biblical principles. And one of the final people that I'll have is Lauren Sisler. She's an ESPN reporter. She does a lot of SEC work, football, gymnastics, and talk about a gut-wrenching story. Lost her parents and her brothers to addictions. And so, we're going to talk to her. And again, that will go definitely down that'll be talked about a lot from a faith-based perspective as well. So I hope you've enjoyed today. I try to keep my episodes around, 25 to 30 minutes. And unless I have a guest, those are probably going to go 45 to 50. And when you hear my guest, you'll know why. I'm not going to cut them short. It's the stories are too rich. They're too good. And I'll let those go. But this one, we're kind of butting up against, kind of my max. And so, I wanted to talk a little bit, though, today about, we made the top of the Apple charts. Yeah, shout out to all the people that made that possible. I'm pretty stoked about that. We talked a little bit about season 1. We talked a little bit about season 2. And we talked about what this podcast is about. And it's really about leadership. It's really about, and we're going to get into a lot more. The thing I talk a lot about is emotional intelligence. I talk a lot about well-being because I believe in the neuroscience of taking care of your body, sleep, nutrition. We're going to get into a lot of neuroscience on the body. And I believe in efficiency, productivity. I believe, how you prepare and focus for life is very important. And a lot of that has to do with mind, body, and soul. Mind, body, and soul. So anyway, that's where we're going to go. And we're going to talk more about it. So come with me. Hang with me. I hope you have fun. I want to thank you for joining me today in, again, Season 2, Episode 1. I hope you've taken a nugget or two from today's discussion to learn more about, leadership and inspiration. If you want to, hey, DM me, Stan at stangibsonspeaks.com, Stan at stangibsonspeaks.com, or just go to my website, stangibsonspeaks.com, stangibsonspeaks.com. Thank you so much, everybody. Really appreciate you just taking the time to listen, and may you all live a rich and intentional life. Take care. Bye. Well, that's it for today, my friends. I hope this conversation sparked something meaningful for you. If it did, share it with someone who could use a little inspiration too. You can find more tools, stories, and coaching to support your journey at stangibsonspeaks.com.